Hello, everybody. I'm just going to do a little bit of an informal live stream today because a couple things came up that I think are worth talking about, and just for clarification. And actually, I also got this crazy book called This Pervasive Day, and I think I'm going to read you the first chapter because it goes along with what I want to talk about. So, in the past week, I've gotten two separate comments. Sort of referencing this idea of zero knowledge proofs. And, people are like, well, at least I have some hope in what is coming because of these zero knowledge proofs. And I think to me, this indicates that people are still not understanding the fundamental aspects of token engineering and Web3 extended reality. And I guess in some ways that's to be understandable because for the most part, people have been trained in the space to really focus on privacy, right? And that's really what's been driven home lately with like leaks and the Cambridge Analytica and this idea of like big tech owning your data and that you should own your data. And the reason that I understand it differently is because I could see this coming a long time ago in the education space. Because just like healthcare, education is going to be a space that they want everybody to have, all of your data that will create your digital twin, aggregated through these ed tech and digital media and learning devices. And so I could see maybe 4 or 5 years ago when I was first starting to understand blockchain identity that like, hey, this is a false narrative. This is the narrative of like, oh my gosh, look at the leaks. Look at here, this ed tech company went and sold out to a company in China, and now all the children's data is in China. And all of that, and not that I'm saying that any of that is good, but essentially it's like, as we understand, make the problem to offer the solution. And so the solution was going to be your digital identity, your mastery transcript, your learn card wallet that would also open up access to various kinds of evidence-based social services out of the school, whether that be mental health or healthcare or food assistance or helping your family get housing. And all of those things would be embedded in your digital identity wallet. And for me, I thought that was a false choice because one, if we agree to live in that world of Web3 extended reality where our rights and privileges are determined by our tokens on our phone, that means that we've agreed to live in a world where there's ubiquitous sensing, there's all sorts of EMF radiation, there's like global level cybernetic and steering, and the ability to turn any living thing into an asset to be traded and speculated on. And so when these people are saying, and in core to this idea of living in what Cliff and I, we've come to call it the outside in robot, is this idea of ubiquitous sensing linked to a unique identifier. And that all of this is framed as trust. Like, we will build in digital trust for you. This is what's coming. We will build in trust. So all of the big scary world, and again, this is a lot of trauma-based mind control. We will keep you safe from the scary world as long as you trust in the machine, as long as you trust in the global computation system. You don't actually have to, because now you're not dealing with people who are in your workplace or live on your block or connected to your child's school or connected to some sort of civic organization that you belong to. You're transacting in an extended global reality, right? And you don't actually know who people are on the other end. You may think that you have relationships with them that have been built in digital space, but as myself, I have learned that often things are more complicated than that, and relationships you think you have, like when it comes down to it, sometimes flip very quickly into things that are not what you thought. So all of that is to condition us to say, like, okay, we will give ourselves over to the digital computing device. And in that, we've agreed to have this digital identity, and we've agreed to coat the world in nanotech and frequencies. And this isn't just for humans, right? Because they're going to give wallets to animals, and like, who knows, maybe they'll figure out a way to, give a wallet to, bacterial enzyme in the soil or something like that. Like, it's every aspect of the world that's going to be turned into the supercomputer. And so what's interesting, so I have these two books. I don't know if you can see it. One is This Perfect Day by Ira Levin, and one is This Pervasive Day by Jeremy Pitt. And so we've kind of gone our separate ways, but I will credit Michael Caine for introducing me to this book that I was not aware of. It's by Ira Levin, and you can see here a new novel by the author of Rosemary's Baby. And so let's see, this book was published in 1970. Okay, so a couple years after Rosemary's Baby. And I will just point out that I was born the year, I think at least the movie Rosemary's Baby came out. And my mother's name is Rosemary, so that's kind of weird. So this is Ira Levin, and he also did Boys from Brazil. So I'll just read the jacket here. This is the book club edition. With the same riveting directness that made Witchcraft in Manhattan a terrifying reality for the millions of readers of Rosemary's Baby, Ira Levin has now evoked an entire world, its customs and costumes, its forbidden words, its pastimes, its songs, its startling secrets. This Perfect Day is an extraordinary reading experience, a work of superb imagination and irresistible storytelling skill. The time of the novel is a century and a half after the unification of the nations, and its hero, not its anti-hero, but its hero, is a young man called Chip, who fights a desperate battle for freedom in a world benumbed by chemistry and computerization. Chip's grandfather, Papa John, first wakens him to a sense of his dormant individuality, and later other people crucially affect Chip's life. A gifted young artist named Carl, an unusual girl called Lilac, King, the leader of a group of renegades, Julia, a woman whose own urge towards freedom is inextinguishable. The action of the novel spans years and continents, and in its course, the reader shares Chip's triumphs and failures and stands beside him as he faces a final, electrifying revelation. This Perfect Day is a story of suspense and love and adventure, but is more than that too, for it is shaped and underlaid by the thought-provoking social inquiry. The terrors of Rosemary's Baby were the terrors out of mankind's past. The terrors of this perfect day are the terrors that all too possibly may wait in mankind's future. And so essentially, this is a world run by Unicomp, a global computer. And I will put forward this idea of the unification is that I've been looking a bit into, and it's been a while since I looked at it, but this organization called ICUS, I-C-U-S, which was the merging of the social sciences and the physical sciences. And it was done through the Unification Church in South Korea. So those are the Moonies. And very, very high-level scientists from all over the world were meeting in South Korea under the auspices of Reverend Sung Myung Moon of the Unification Church to talk about the blending of social science and physical sciences towards this new age. So I think this idea of unification is really central and maybe actually more helpful than this idea of globalists, which I think is a word that has its own sort of baggage that may not be actually totally in line with where I think things are going. I think it might be a somewhat limited perspective. So the world in this perfect day is run by Unicomp, and it's run by Unicomp through monthly chemical administrations that keep people docile and controlled within the machine. And, you know, I've done this read aloud before of We, Yevgeny Zamyatin's We, and you know, I think that's really, this was the precursor to Levin. It's not like Levin totally came up with this. It was connected to, so We, Yevgeny Zamyatin, he was in Russia, and this was written, I think, in 1924. This edition is 1972, it was translated. But this idea of a world built on logic, on mathematical logic. And so I think in that, if we can get to that space of understanding this concept, that Web3 extended reality, we can understand, like whether you want to label it communitarian, whether you want to label it technocracy, whether you want to call it the ant computer, like I've been, that it is organizing the world according to automated structures that are sort of beyond human control. Maybe they're programmed, but like the world as a decentralized autonomous organization, like run at the top, like HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I think that this is really key. And what zero knowledge proofs are, and I'll go ahead and read this definition. Let's see. Okay, so this is from the Ethereum page. And as you know, if you've been following along, my focus has been like not crypto per se. Like tons of people want to talk about crypto and all the aspects of crypto. I myself am more interested in the smart contract layer because my focus has been on this idea of financializing life on the planet and creating these speculative derivatives products linked to Internet of Things real-time data flows, and what that means for children, what that means for the natural world, for what that means for this idea of governance and quote unquote like democracy in this world. So the zero knowledge proof is what's going to interface you as a digital commodity, as a pile of data tokens, like of metadata tags. It renders you as to the machine, and then you are embedded in society, right? So you are embedded in your family, you are embedded in your neighborhood, in your city, and so on and so forth. So it's fractal, it's at many scales. There's the unit of you, and then there's you in relation. So it's pattern seeking. This is what the quantum computing and impact finance tied to cybernetics is about: identification of pattern, predicting pattern, and guiding pattern. And this is what I've been thinking about a lot more lately with Michael Levin and his interest in morphogenesis and embryogenesis and guided development of cellular structure, often through electrical frequency, not just through neurons, but at every cellular level, and how those electrical fields and the frequency fields create blueprints for patterning. In his case, he was often looking at removing limbs from salamanders and things that would regrow them, but trying to figure out how that was working. And his frame, at least he says publicly, is sort of around regenerative medicine, right? They're there to create, to improve health outcomes and make aging like a nicer thing. But I think what's lurking in the background is that once they can figure out the way to interface with frequency and bioelectricity to form not only quote unquote like medicine, but shaping patterns, shaping organisms, then we're moving on to Oliver Reiser's The World Brain, right? That we're neuroblasts in some emergent global superorganism. And as I've said, increasingly people are like, why are they doing this? And if you go around the noise of the internet, the social media feeds, it'll be like, they want to make a lot of money. Oh, they want to kill everyone. Oh, they want to control everyone. Oh, they're lizard people, with the bloodlines and blah, 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 blah. And so I'm not saying that it's none of those things. Like, yes, there's some of those things, but I don't think that's the end point. The end point is that I think there's something inherent in the soul, the creative soul of life, that there may be something that is in this emergent mechanical consciousness that is seeking to co-opt that capacity, both distinctive within our own selves, our own ego, our own identity, and then as our relationship to others for some sort of computational program. And that is the ant computer, but at a much, much higher level, using humans, in particular, socialized humans that are trained within a cybernetic construct to act and to actually potentially tap into the collected unconscious through dream states, through psychedelics, through altered states of consciousness, through contemplative religious practice. And what is guided, what they hope to get the reins of, is to steer us with electricity, and so. So our interaction with their fields, like with their non-natural field systems of electricity, are through the smart contracts, through this Web3 layer. Instead of interacting with the natural electromagnetism of the earth, which is still there, but they're inserting a layer in between that will tap into the information layer for their predictive and their attempts at programming us, and then to, I think, further separate us from those natural energetics that exist as, water carbon-based beings in the planet, like bathed in frequency. They're inserting their unnatural frequencies and their unnatural contracting arrangements into this layer of logic, which is again what Unicomp in This Perfect Day and we, which is the preceder, is for that. So I will just read quickly what are zero knowledge proofs, and this is from Ethereum. So it says a zero knowledge proof is a way of providing the validity of a statement without revealing the statement itself. The prover is the party trying to prove a claim, while the verifier is responsible for validating the claim. Zero knowledge proofs first appeared in a 1985 paper, The Knowledge Complexity of Interactive Proof Systems, which provides a definition of zero-knowledge proofs widely used today. A zero-knowledge protocol is a method by which one party, the prover, can prove to another party, the verifier, that something is true without revealing any information apart from the fact that this specific statement is true. Zero-knowledge proofs have improved over the years, and they are now being used in several real-world applications. Why do we need zero-knowledge proofs? Zero-knowledge proofs represented a breakthrough in applied cryptography as they promised to improve security of information for individuals, right? And of course we know that none of this is fully secure, but this is the line that they're selling everyone. So consider how you might prove a claim. In other words, I am a citizen of X country to another party, a service provider. You would need to provide evidence to back up your claim, such as a national passport or driver's license. And so what they're always doing is they're always coming up with like some very, this use case that really no one would have a problem with, right? And it says, there are problems with this approach, chiefly the lack of privacy. Personally identifiable information, PII, shared with third-party services is stored in central databases vulnerable to hacks, as if wallets aren't subject to hacks, because wallets and digital identity are totally subject to being hacked. With identity theft becoming a critical issue, there are calls for more privacy-protecting means of sharing sensitive information. So this is the story that is being told, that in order to verify yourself and only provide limited amounts of information, we will create a zero-knowledge proof that's simply like, do you have this verification that I'm looking for? And this is intrinsically linked to this idea of electronic government, rights and privileges, and how we navigate the built environment that is increasingly mediated and gate-kept by sensors and circuits. And so this is part of the whole Flow Life. This is the importance of the Flow Life series, is this idea of smart housing is starting to dig into what does it mean when things like locks, things like smart appliances, things like automobiles, things like, just public transportation begin to have yes or no statements of verification attached to them, right? And so if someday something comes up and you need a credential showing that you have proven yourself to be a good citizen in some way, whatever that behavior is, something probably aligned to a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, to access the grocery store. It doesn't actually matter so much of the privacy. Like, you can have all the privacy you want on your wallet, but if you walk up to the grocery store and you don't have the token proving that you have performed the task of acceptance to consensus reality and the expected things, then you will not be able to open the door. So it doesn't really matter that it's private, because everyone waiting in behind you in the line will know that you couldn't get in the door, and they will make all sorts of presumptions about why that is, right? And that can be made even more intimate. And I often have talked about smart toilets, Stanford developing smart toilets that are sampling, your morning deposit. If that is synced with the lock on your door, and AI has come up with some sort of biomedical marker that they all of a sudden decided that if you indicate this marker in your toilet, that your door won't unlock for 2 weeks, and you'll only be allowed to have sort of deliveries delivered by Amazon drones or robots to your house of your groceries, and you have to stay inside, then that can all be done on a zero knowledge proof, but it still inherently compromises our way of life. And the same, Leo has been applying, as much as I focus on the human capital side, on the natural capital. And so this idea of a zero knowledge proof might be that someone creates a commodity off of a section of forest or a section of farm that's supposed to be doing carbon sequestration. And that is assigned, that in and of itself has a wallet and sets of tokens and verifications, and that there are drones or things that, initially it might be someone who comes with a tablet and a camera and takes a digital photo or whatever, but it's very clear, given the direction of where things are going, that is going to increasingly be more and more automated. And then when there are issues with the zero knowledge proofs, who do you appeal to? Because this is all being run by computational systems, organizations, corporations that are structured as decentralized autonomous organizations. So this idea of that if you that it shouldn't be centralized. Nothing should be centralized. Everything should be decentralized. But when there's a problem, where do you go to address the problem? And so this is why I keep like really hammering home, we have to move beyond the crypto conversation into the understanding the Web3 smart contracts. We have to understand the deontic logic proofs. We need to understand what it means to live in a world run by math as creative, soulful beings, right? We have to understand what it means. Increasingly, I'm looking at frequency and oscillations, because that is part of the morphogenesis and the guiding systems. And so what will it mean if we agree to allow the world to be overlain with these unseen frequencies in various spectra? Optical, I was just listening to a crazy lecture the last couple days from another Stanford professor, and it makes so much sense that Lewis Terman, the first president of Stanford, was part of the Human Betterment Project, like a total eugenicist, interested in genius and psychology. So this idea of steering us towards some sort of Superman program, like the Ubermensch, the Nazis, like it wasn't just Germany, guys, like it was really deeply embedded in the US consciousness of this optimization metric, right? And so this professor at Stanford was working with optogenetics, which is something that I've known about for a while, but a lot of the articles that I had seen with lab rats, and they were even talking about implanting false memories in experimental subjects, but they accessed the brain through light frequency. They could program through light. And so they actually had to access the brain through these different modules, like antenna head mice, right? Which is pretty clunky, but the goal is always to go to the next phase. So in this talk, he was talking about rhodopsins, and which are these little units that are in algae that are photosynthetic and that react to light in a certain way and allow for the functionalization of neurons in the brain, and then using gene and cell therapies to get past the blood-brain barrier and to get that in a quote-unquote not so invasive way, and then manipulate these rats from a distance in a non-invasive way through light modulation, right? And the guy's like, oh yeah, no, we could turn, we can make them eat more, we can make them eat less, we can make them, get along with each other, not get along with each other. And I mean, and his focus, he was a biomedical engineer and a psychiatrist, and his focus was dissociation and epilepsy and altered states of consciousness. So I think that's what they're after. They're after some sort of remote modulation system. So yeah, this idea that we're going to coat the world in nanotech and frequency, and that just because they tell us that we have some privacy and decentralization, we're supposed to just go like, oh, okay. And this is what they've sold to many young people, many people who feel like they're on the cutting edge of things, but they don't actually understand it's not quite the cutting edge, because this stuff has been in the works since, what did they say, like the 80s and the 90s for sure. So it's not quite cutting edge, but they needed to get into a place to tell the story. And so in fact, one of these commenters actually referenced the Green Pill podcast. And, that guy is at the center working with Block Science and Michael Zargham on building the outside-in robot, on building it. And as much as they want to tell you that it's some sort of cool progressive thing, or you can make a lot of money and do good in the world and all this stuff, it's not that. We really have to come to terms with what it means to live in a world run by logic and not by human experience. So I'm gonna okay, so I want to mention, so I'm in the middle of trying to write up a blog post yesterday. So it's the Philadelphia mayor's race. I think it's the 100th mayor of Philadelphia, which seems significant. And I'm so checked out of politics right now. It's just not my team sport at all. But this particular mayoral forum, you had to pre-register, and it was on education. So it was if there was one I was going to go to, I thought that should be it. And, I almost didn't feel like going, but then I went in the end. And it was interesting, because given all the stuff that I'm talking about fields and modulations and frequency, right? The pervasive day, look at, even at the cover, you've got that on there, is the, it was at the Franklin Institute. So the Franklin Institute is on the Ben Franklin Parkway. It's not far from my house. And yeah, it was from the 1930s, but the Franklin Institute was named after Ben Franklin, promoting the mechanical arts. And of course, Ben Franklin, was an inventor and a statesman, but very, very interested in in electricity, all kinds of electricity, and also frequency. So I think that was telling, because the people who were sponsoring this actually in the olden days, when I had my old frame, I would have said, oh, these are the education privatizers and they're pushing ed tech and whatever. But in reality, these are the people who are doing the war on consciousness, I think. But it's so banal. Like you go and it's all... I'm not impressed by any of the candidates, if anyone is like curious and watching me from Philadelphia. Clearly, our city, not unlike Dallas, and I've talked to Lynn a lot about Dallas, we have a lot of kids. We have a lot of kids in poverty. We've been identified as a city of the impact economy. And the children in particular are being targeted because they're going to be raised up to live in the logic layer, right? And to think that that's normal. They have to create the aquarium water in which these children will swim. And that's done largely in schools and through the schools converting the families to this structure. So, I spent the day running around asking people and buttonholing. I got about 4 of the candidates buttonholed about social impact bonds. I'm like, do you know about social impact bonds? Do you know that there are plans to securitize them as assets and trade them on global markets? Do you realize that those bonds can then be shorted in that? Like, do you understand what it means to have digital identities for children, learner wallets, and then how that will interface with smart environments? Like all of these things. And, for the most part, every aspect of the panel discussion, which was led by the Philadelphia Ed Fund, I think, was setting up impact finance. It was setting up workforce readiness. It was setting up after school time programming. It was looking at funding mechanisms, public-private partnerships. And they were saying things like, keeping jobs in Philadelphia, as if they didn't notice over the past 3 years of lockdowns that we've shifted to a remote work model. Also, what came up a lot was gun violence. And so, but once you understand that they can use these frequencies to manipulate whole populations, like I do start to wonder about, like, not that there's not a rationale for people who are poor, who don't have a lot of prospects to be under stress and react with violence. And it's not like, the whole illegal gun problem is something that's just outside of us. Like our government enables it so that poor people can kill one another and that they can use that to create justifications for what comes next. But every single thing that they talked about was for impact finance, but it was never said. It was never said out loud. No one ever said when they were talking about college readiness and the next phase of where kids were going. And the audience, I would say, was 2/3 nonprofits that were positioned for a post-college readiness training. So this is your lifelong learning on the blockchain. None of them talked about blockchain. None of them even pretend. Essentially, the conversation was such that you could have been having the same conversation in 2020. It was like nothing. No one talked about AI. No one talked about automation of jobs. The one thing that came up that was relevant in terms of current was that Alan Dom, who is the real estate, very rich guy in real estate, he was working with Drexel to try to develop the first, I don't know if it's high school or a community college that was aligned with the life sciences. He's like, we will be first. We will work with Drexel and Philadelphia Community College to create. He's like, I had a private dinner. I had a private dinner with 13 biotech companies. And what we decided was that in addition, taxes were a problem and, location space was a problem, but the biggest problem was talent. So we're going to groom up these kids to be gene and cell engineers and we're going to deliver these children to the industry that they want. And yet no one is even talking about like, hey, did you check out that Michael Levin video where he's pretty much like God is dead and pretty soon we're going to have gills and tails and extra brain lobes and things like through these therapies and through these frequencies? Like, should we talk about this first before we decided that we're going to feed our young people into this program? So one of the I was checking in, and it's interesting. So I'll just show. This is the Education Works. I think they were the sponsors, and this is what they get: launch pad to the future. And I will say a lot of this is linked to rockets. There's a lot of stuff implying space. Has been for a long time. One of the key operators in the impact finance space in Santa Clara was Fred Ferrer and Rocket Ship Academy charter schools. So you've got Launchpad to the Future, Science Leadership Academy that maintains associations with the Franklin Institute, also rocket ships. but I don't think it's space the way we understand space. I think increasingly that this launch pad is into an extended reality on the way into the matrix. Like, here, welcome to your space pod, but it's actually a matrix pod and you're covered in goo and turned into a battery. Like, so it's significant. And there's a little girl and she's almost faded out. Like, you can't even see her. She's not the primary focus. The focus is on the jellyfish and the light. And so a lot of the stuff that's coming along with morphogenesis and bioelectricity and photonic stimulation is linked to these ocean creatures. So I thought that was quite interesting. So, and they said, oh, do you want a tote bag? And I'm like, no, but I'll take the material. So I took this, I'm writing this up. And then they had all these people in the lobby for this thing called the Kids Campaign. And the kit, and so, it's got the QR code, of course. And I don't know if you can see what it says there. It says safety, education, careers, uplift, recreation, environment. And then the acronym for that is secure. And I think that this is part of the esoteric word spells, right? Because secure is supposed to make you feel safe, but secure is also to contain and control, and it's related to securitization. So the financialization of children, I think, is going to be part of this. They're literally saying that these 40 nonprofits, here it says, what's the next mayor got to do with you? Do you want safe neighborhoods? How about good, clean schools, great teachers, and mental health resources? What about access to jobs? Demand the next mayor work for you. And then they're collecting everybody's information. But yeah, this secure thing, and I'm not saying that the people who've signed up, the 40 nonprofits who are signed up to promote this campaign, are bad people or that they even know what this is doing or where it's going. But this secure is going to be provided to you by Unicomp, the outside-in robot. The robot is going to provide your security and your education and whatever a career looks like in the global gig economy, and to uplift or optimize you and to recreate you and harvest your piezoelectric energy and to connect you to the environment and use you as a cost offset for climate-related impact trading, and all of that gets fed into the machine. And my frustration is, I talked to, about 7 different people wearing badges for this campaign. And it was quite a psychological experiment to go up to people and just talk to them. And again, this is the mayoral campaign. This is what it looks like to be civically involved, to be an active citizen who has information to offer into the discussion. It was contextually relevant. And yet, if you start to poke through the holes of consensus reality and put people in a place that maybe they have to reflect on their participation in a system that could actually not be at all what they understood it to be, it's really complicated. And for the most part, people just shrink back. They just shrink back. And I was hoping that I might see a few people that I used to organize with in the education space, because again, this was the education panel for the mayor's race. These are people who, for the most part, understand themselves as sort of liberal progressives and politically active and activists. And I only saw one. And, as I sat down near this woman, she came over to me and she's like, oh, how are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm hanging in there. And she's like, sort of what's up? And I was like, well, my view keeps expanding. It keeps getting bigger, right? I've moved on to these other spaces. Not that education isn't important. Actually, it was a vital door to go in and understand how AI, using this sort of parasitic AI was using us and children, to create this computational system, like a living computational system. But I said, my view keeps getting bigger. And, this is a group I'd offered within the past 6 months to come and brief about this bigger picture, about the Ant Computer, about digital identity, about the Learn Card, about impact finance and AI and the impact tokens, and just silence, like crickets. I put the offer out there. And these were people that I thought respected me and understood my commitment and my diligence and my research skills. And, I look, they still have a blog, they still go to the school board meetings and they look at the agenda and they yell at certain things, but they don't actually understand about the bigger picture. So they're constantly in a reactive mode. They look at the agenda and then they react. And that's exactly how, because when you choose to pursue that course of action, I think what it means is that you're operating within their game board. You've consented to operate within their game board. Now, if you can step out and try to occupy another narrative space and frame out your own understanding of it and then bring that into light, saying that you could still use school board testimony to do that, but you could actually flip the table on them. And instead of being reactive, you could be proactive and put them on the spot for things outside of the small contained narrative structure that's being offered to you. But they couldn't, for some reason, whatever reason, they were threatened by this idea. And I think they all still really believe in the political process and that somehow they're going to vote the right person in and that it's going to take care of things, because they don't actually understand that this is a global story and what the noosphere is and what, social computation is. And I think if they did, maybe they would feel unmoored, and they're not. They stay in their lane. And so, I didn't go into this much detail, but I looked at her and I said, the thing is, it seems to me that you guys don't want to know, that for the most part, you're going around in the circles. You're just keep being in circles over and over again, and that you don't want to know. And she said, she kind of looked, and that her whole body structure just stiffened up. And she's like, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And she said that same phrase, I'm sorry you feel that way, about 5 or 6 times. I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm sorry. And I said the person's name. And then I said, you don't have to feel sorry. I'm just explaining how it is. This is just how it is. You guys aren't interested. And to be honest, if she were interested at any point, she could have said, we've been really busy, or we've been really overwhelmed, but maybe after the mayor's race, you could come and talk to us. At any point, that offer was open to come and brief them, not to tell them exactly what they should be doing, but to brief them so that they have a better assessment of the terrain, and that maybe they can get off the school board's game board and onto their own game board and follow their own course that is more fulfilling. But that's not what she said. And in fact, later on, there was a break, a stretch break after the first hour. And she came over to me and she said, you can't ever tell me what to say. And literally, I was just like, listen, woman, you don't have to actually say that you're sorry. It is what it is, right? And so, but that was this emotional reactivity that's really it's almost like it inhabited her entire energetic prospect, right? And I'm, as upsetting as all of this is and overwhelming, I've gotten to a point that I can engage with it. And I've learned to acknowledge where I become emotionally reactive, which I actually kind of was with these people who are like, hey, I've got the answers, zero knowledge proofs. They make me feel really good. And I'm like, no, it's not that. So that's why I have to do this thing. But to at least be more aware and to try to look at things from a little bit more of a remove, because there you can actually understand more, because you don't get hung up and short-circuited in these certain loops of thinking. So anyway, so I'm writing this up, but I think that this idea, the zero knowledge truths will be used to secure you on the learn card and your digital identity. And the children are on the front lines and they can't consent to any of these things. So, candidates, I talked to David O. and Alan Dom and Rebecca Reinhart and Derek Green. I don't know if he's still running. He was in the panel. Now, I didn't even bother with Helen Kim. She's kind of the favorite of the education crowd in Philadelphia, because for the most part, Helen Kim has held me at arm's length for forever, because she too doesn't actually want to know, or at least publicly know, be known to have known what is actually happening. And she attended this sort of Rebel Cities conference in Barcelona a while back. She styles herself as very progressive, but she was also on the panel. I've often talked about that panel at the 2016 Democratic National Convention that the Atlantic magazine sponsored with the guy from Epic Games, Megan, and Suzanne Del Bene, where they were talking about how they needed the children to code the video games. And she was up on the stage, not questioning that at all. And in fact, I think she's very much been about closing the digital divide and promoting community schools and mental health services and redirecting public funds into all these things. And again, not to say that there isn't trauma or challenges in the public school system or food insecurity or other issues, but medicalizing children where you actually, it's a free-for-all for the data because FERPA was gutted, that is about securitizing the children in the name of social justice, in the name of community building, in the name of civic activism. And it really turns my stomach, honestly. So if any of you guys are out there and you're advocates for Helen Kim, I think you really need to put her on the spot, because pretty much she didn't really have much new to offer in the panel, even though that this was definitely like her wheelhouse. It's pretty much like her line was like, I've been doing activism on this for a long time, so you should just, vote for me because, I've earned it, sort of thing. But again, no acknowledgement whatsoever of the realities of the world that we're going to be like, that today's Head Start preschoolers are going to be turned out into, 15 years from now, and what the implications are. Like, this should have been a forum dealing with biotech and AI and the implications of human life in the education system. And it wasn't that. It wasn't that at all. It was essentially just a setup for impact finance. So, okay. So I'm gonna just take a moment and read this first chapter. So Jeremy Pitt, for people who aren't aware, he is with the Imperial College London. This is a Imperial College Press. He edited this volume, so it's composed of a lot of different folks. He was in a video. He recently did. This is from 2012. This book. So this is at least. I mean, we know it's longer than 10 years. It's been at least since the 90s, or you could say the 70s. 90s cloud computing, 70s, supercomputing, 40s cybernetics. 18th century Enlightenment thinking. Like, it sort of goes, then back to the Roman Empire of domination. So it's a very long time coming. But knowing that this pervasive computing dates back a decade, and I was watching a video that he did with Katina Michaels, I believe, who's a professor now at Arizona State University, Michael Crow's stomping grounds, and they were all about, he had done a book like the anarcho-socialist something computing thing. Like, essentially it's the world is this idea of commoning, tokenized commoning, and DAOs, and pitching this idea that we're all going to live in these little villages, I guess the 15-minute cities, with our Linux servers in the basement, and we're all going to have our smart meters, and we're all going to trade back and forth our electricity. And it seems that, like, clearly from this image that he's like, he knows the frequency part of this, right? Like, you wouldn't feature this on your image. And actually, it's quite interesting because his book, the one with the anarcho-socialism, has the Escher never-ending staircase, like the up and down staircase, which is sort of, again, this inversion and the mirroring. I will just say, so I'm going to write this up, and I'll probably stick this link in the blog when I get it up. But the one thing is, so the Franklin Institute, it's supposedly a science and technology museum, supposedly like the most visited museum in Pennsylvania. But the building dates to the 30s. But it's really been mostly edutainment for the past 20 years. Like, their big blockbuster things are like Harry Potter, and then right now ongoing, I think it's wrapping up, is 100-year anniversary of Disney. So it has on the outside of the banners Mickey Mouse from Fantasia and the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And above the Mickey Mouse are these sort of fractal glass fragments with iridescent coloring with different characters in the glass. So it does, to me, evoke optics and photonics and holographic reality. And the thing about Fantasia is that the musical score, which is really central, was by Leopold Stokowski in Philadelphia. So that's pretty interesting. And then I came across, when I was doing my research on the Human Betterment Foundation, the eugenics programs, with Louis Terman. He had a son, Frank Terman, who is also a professor at Stanford and very key in actually developing the tech industry in South Korea. So doing a lot of that's what Frank Terman did. But he was a mentor to the people that were Hewlett-Packard. I can't remember their first names, but Hewlett and Packard. And, so the story goes, in a Palo Alto garage, they created this, these technologies. And one of them was an oscillating machine. And it was this certain kind of sound processing oscillator. And it was, I guess they had lowered a price point, and Disney was their first big customer. And they used this sound oscillation for, like, Fantasia-rama, or some sort of early surround sound connected to Fantasia. And then later, during World War II, those technologies got all folded into the radar, military radar frequency processing. So, I just think the electricity piece is really important. So you've got the Mickey Mouse and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? The things going astray. And what I realized after I made my rounds, this was the event, the education forum was in the the theater of the Franklin Institute. One wall was these large windows that had curtains, and then facing about the same scale, so large, maybe 6 feet by 10-foot panels, paintings, from the time of the construction. So they had that sort of 1920s, 30s feeling. It had Newton, Galileo, Copernicus. And then, and this literally, this caught my eye because they were high up on the wall. So you might see that there was something up there, but unless you really stopped and to take a look, you wouldn't really see the paintings, or at least from where I was sitting. I was on the side of the room that was under the painting. So you had to get some distance to look up and actually see the paintings. And I was talking to an older gentleman and a young woman who was a literacy intern, and explaining about social impact bonds, and they were both Black, and explaining that this idea of photonic computing and optical computing, and that melanin has all of these very amazing optical properties and is being used for biocompatibility in nanotech, both natural and artificial melanin. And I had brought this up because the gentleman was just expressing his own unhappiness with this particular group, and saying that, I would say he's in his later 60s. He's like, yeah, they closed my high school. And these people, like, you just can't trust them. And he said it was University City High. And that's, if you, we're watching my, the presentation that I did on University City Health Science District. Yeah, it was totally obliterated. Mantua was taken over by Penn for these efforts, and then now it is they're essentially turning it into a biotech hub, right, in Allendom. So so like he came from a very personal perspective about why this was all wrong, and and I was talking to them, and I said, to be honest, and I don't even know why I said this, but I sort of confided in them. I said, sometimes it feels like there's some esoteric stuff involved in all of this. And then we sort of said our goodbyes, and I walked up the steps because the exit of the theater was at the top of the stairs, and the top painting, so the highest painting point as you entered and exited the room, instead of a name, so you had Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, it actually said, it had a wizard with flaming cauldrons and books, and it said alchemy and astrology. And I just wonder, does anyone even notice that painting? So you've got and this is where the IEEE people, they're talking about metaphysics, right? It does feel like sorcery, that they're on the one hand, they talk about all this technical aspects, but on the other side, it feels like sorcery. So imagine these zero knowledge proofs and this web layer of frequency as a new type of and this quest for programmable matter, programmable consciousness, steering consciousness, guided evolution as part of this. So I'm just going to read a little bit from This Perfect Day. It's very interesting to me that it's got the frequency stuff. And I was talking with, there was a guy who was also, actually, I think he was from Berkeley. He was on this Crypto Skeptic conference, and he was designing some sort of security systems for drones, right? But he was really all bent out of shape about the blockchain money coming into his department. And yet he was building surveillance drones technology. So it's very messed up. But he was a big proponent of zero knowledge proofs. And, and he was talking about, when he was talking about the dirty, all the money flowing from blockchain into his department. And he was saying, he gave another example, and for whatever reason, he's like, say, for example, you wanted to start a department of applied demonology. And he said this in his clip, that was included in the Crypto Skeptic conference. That was his example. Say you wanted to start and it reminded me of this 1960s article with the, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember back, but it was the launching of a supercomputer in Israel. And one of the key rabbi who understood the Kabbalah and the sacred aspects and the golems had said essentially these people had created a golem, and that he had been asking this rabbi, the Weizmann Institute, to, instead of investing all their money into applied mathematics, to create an institute of applied demonology. And I emailed the Berkeley professor saying hey, were you referencing this article from the 60s? Because it kind of sounds like it. And in this, he actually, another comment that this guy had, he was talking about Neil Gaiman's book and Scaries, Skerries. And Scaries are these little prickly islands of consciousness, these prickly islands of consciousness. And to me, Steffers and I, we were kind of looking through that a while back. And so to me, Steffers, if you're watching, this looks a lot like Scaries to me. So, okay, so this is the preface. Christ marks wood and way, led us to this perfect day. Marks, wood, way, and Christ, all but way were sacrificed. Wood, way, Christ, and marks gave us lovely schools and parks. Way, Christ, marks, and wood made us humble, made us good. Child's rhyme for bouncing a ball this perfect day. And I would just remind you that in A Wrinkle in Time, when they went to Camazotz, that was part of it, was the bouncing the ball. And now I'm thinking about it, actually, it just occurred to me, but the oscillation, that everyone had to bounce their ball in perfect unison. And that's a frequency, and that's an entrainment. And if you bounce the ball not in the bouncing pattern, you were punished. And so in the light of frequency, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is Jeremy Pitt, 2012, this pervasive day, based on this perfect day. How it all began. The dry story. In 2008, the European Union's Future and Emerging Technologies program launched a proactive research initiative into pervasive adaptation. One of the projects funded under that initiative was the Coordination Action Panorama, and that's in italics. Panorama is in italics. One of the partners in that coordination action was Imperial College London. One of the responsibilities of that partner was to lead the work package on public dissemination, to bring emerging technology of pervasive and adaptive computing to the attention of a wider audience, in particular EU citizens. One of the deliverables of that work package was a popular science book exploring and explaining those pervasive computing technologies. This is that book. How it really all began. The personal story. My mother gave me her copy of Ira Levin's 1970 novel, This Perfect Day, to read. She also lent it to my brother. It became something of a family book, and the original copy, something of a bone of contention, though I have conceded the argument since I started looking after, in perpetuity, Mr. Haldane's first edition. As an aside, with the exception of one of the following, all quotations, section and chapter epigraphs are taken from this 1970 hardback first edition, Ira Levin, 1970, This Perfect Day, New York, Random House. This Perfect Day is, by Wikipedia's description, a heroic science fiction novel of a technocratic utopia, or by the description on the back cover of the 1971 paperback edition, New York, Fawcett Crest. Quote, tomorrow's world is a place where computers rule, where monthly treatments keep people docile, where sex is programmed weekly, and where death occurs at the age of 62 in the interest of efficiency. This Perfect Day is the story of a citizen of the future in conflict with the world of a nightmare. This Perfect Day back cover. Now read on, as they say. Don't read any more of the wiki page. It contains spoilers. One thing we have tried to do in this book, although there are hints, is not to give anything away. Anyway, the novel had a profound influence on me, as it does on most people who read it, and I've reread it many times. The social questions it raises are timeless, and at its heart, there is a rather good story, very well told. The content and the theme stayed with me ever since, even after many years as a computing and information technology professional, until the Panorama Coordination Action gave me the opportunity to do something I'd been thinking about for a very long time, to work on a book which we live against to work on a book that evaluated the advances in computing technology and the society in which we live against the fictional description of the computer antihero and the utopian society described in the novel. In particular, I had in mind a book that explored the potential of the remarkable advances in computing since the novel was written, and the ways in which it can be used, either to make life wonderful or to make life unbearable. This is that book. Dramatis Persona, Glossary. You do not need to have to read the novel to appreciate the important informative message of this book, although if you have not read it, you have deprived yourself of one of life's small joys. But the novel was reprinted in 2010, and you don't have to continue depriving yourself anymore. While the most pertinent features of the technocratic utopia are described in Chapter 1, along with an analysis of the computing and communication technology used to implement, quote, the place where computers rule, the following glossary is enough to familiarize the reader with the terms of reference of the novel. And these are terms. LIRM35M4419, parentheses, Chip, the main protagonist of the novel. Anna, SG38P2823, parentheses, Lilac, the love interest, King, Snowflake, Dover, Papa John, Julia, and other minor characters, Unicomp, the bad guy, the omniscient computer in charge of all personal and social decision making, family, the. Everyone on the planet belongs to one big family. Advisor, personal counselor and confessional, everyone has one. Telecomp controller, portable computer used by the advisors to connect wirelessly to Unicomp, uses keyboard or voice input. Classification, the job description that people are assigned to. Advisor is an example of a classification. Chip is a geneticist. Treatment, a cocktail of chemotherapeutic drugs administered monthly. Nameber, each family member has a name, of which there are 4 for boys, Lee, Jesus, Carl, and Bob, and 4 for girls, Anna, Mary, Peace, and Yin, and an alphanumeric string, for example, SG38P2823, making a nameber. Bracelet, worn by each member of the family, with their nameber inscribed on it. Scanner, ubiquitous sensor device for requesting permission to access resources, locations, etc. by touching the scanner with the bracelet. So that is a zero knowledge proof. The nameber and the scanner, and that is what it is. So just for people who are not clear on that, this is why the Web3 stuff is really important. Coveralls, identical unisex functional clothing with only minor variations. For example, Red Cross for medical staff. Total cakes or cokes, identical McFood consumed at every meal. Sounds marvelous, doesn't it? Now look out the window. No bracelets around wrists, but mobile phones clamped to ears, recording GPS data continuously, without, until recently, our knowledge. Thanks, Steve. No scanners, but if you have the misfortune to live in London, CCTV cameras everywhere. Access control through radio frequency identification, RFID tags, embedded in identity cards for travel, work, and so on. A wander around my neighborhood reveals some restaurants without yellow arches, so there is some variation in the food still. It also reveals several yellow signs saying, "Did you see this murder?" So in London, at least, we're still cheerfully stabbing each other, implying we're not one big happy family either. Well, you got the point. You can compare the novel's vision and your own experience and see which is a feature of our world and which is not. This is what the book aims to do, but with the computer technology, by evaluating that technology in its socio-technical context in the novel and in reality. Summary. I have 6 fond hopes for this book. Firstly, that the interested reader will find the contributed chapters as interesting, informative, and engaging, insightful, and yes, as provocative as I did. Imagine yourself in a great socio-technical bazaar, and for a few hours or more marvel and potter as I did, and I'm sure you'll confirm that there is something of surpassing interest in every chapter. Secondly, I hope that anyone who has not read This Perfect Day and having read our book afterwards reads the novel and gets as much enjoyment out of it as I did. Indeed, I envy you the pleasures to come. Thirdly, that anyone who has already read This Perfect Day and having read our book will remember what a stunning literary achievement that novel was, and how well it has withstood the test of time. Fourthly, having at least read our book, that technologists and computer engineers take social responsibility for their inventions and designs, that policymakers use evidence-based, read social impact, policy making when using technology to formulate solutions to social problems, and that citizens everywhere put pressure on scientists and politicians to behave this way. It can be a perfect day, but let's make sure that this is on our terms. Now, I just want to make clear that this evidence-based policymaking is wedded to this idea of public interest technology that ASU is a part of and that Pitt talks about in one of his videos. Fifthly, I'd like to think that if he read this book, Ira Levin would approve. And finally, I hope my mom likes it in a small way of saying thank you for the kindness of giving me the novel to read in the first place and much more besides. Jeremy Pitt, London, December 2011. Okay. And acknowledgements. Thanks very much. Thanks, Julia, too. So I'm not going to read all of the acknowledgements, but there's various people. I'll just read the authors. Ricardo Chavarriaga, Jose de Milan, supported by the EU Future and Emerging Technologies Project. Here's another one. Gualtiero Colombo et al., research funded by Social Nets Grant. ECFP7, Future Emerging Technologies Project, funded under the Pervasive Adaptation Proactive Initiative. Simon Dobson, research report supported by FP7 ICT Future Enabling Technologies Program of the European Commission under grant agreement number 256873 Sapere. Joan Ferrer. For debate and tenacity, many thanks to Angela Finn, PhD student, Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane. And for the vision and generosity, thanks to Catherine Harper, head of school, University of Brighton, UK. Alwa Fersha, supported by the FP7 ICT Future Enabling Technology Program, the Sapere. Let's see, here's another one. FG Research Studios Austria Program under grant agreement number 818652 Pervasive Display Systems. Janice Jeffries, thanks to Barbara Lane and her wonderful team at Hexagram, interesting name, Concordia University, Montreal. Katina Michael, there we got Katina, particularly thanks to various interviewees. Paul Mitchison, partially supported by the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council under grant number EPG 070180/1, Next Generation Energy Harvesting Electronics, because that's always important, all of the piezo. I actually am going to be streaming a talk that I did, or a chat, actually more like a chat than a talk, with Emily Moyer, and we were talking about sugar and programmable matter, and I was looking at diabetes, social impact bonds, and pervasive wearable technologies. And evidently, I guess MIT has come out with some sort of fuel cell that's powered by excess glucose. So yeah, they're all about the energy harvest, however they can get it. You need to be able to harvest enough energy to process your own trackable technology in the Web3. Nicola Serzbedja, many of the ideas and results presented in that chapter have been developed under the Reflect project, project number FP7-215893, funded by the European Commission within the 7th Framework Program, Pervasive Adaptation Proactive Initiative. And again, pervasive adaptation, like what exactly is the adaptation that we're doing, and do people even know where that's going? Jenny Tillotson, special thanks for introducing me to science fiction. Yes, Ken Warren, thanks to Yogi Patel, Phil Smith, and Ian Cowling at the Blue Bear Systems Research Limited and Royal Commission for the exhibition of the 1851 Industrial Fellowship, for the opportunity to study at Imperial College. And anyway, then it just goes on to some other stuff. So I'm just going to touch on like the content, the table of contents. I guess I'll show it to the screen so you can pause and look at it if you want to. So I'll highlight. So the first chapter is by Pitt, Levin's Legacy, about Unicomp. The second one is Aloha Fersha, Implicit Interaction, with things like context awareness, interacting with landscapes of digital artifacts, identity and spatial proximity. This is the next one. I'll hold it up for a second. Oops, sorry. I know this is kind of small. Let's see. So you guys can look. Okay, so the third chapter, brain-computer interfaces, Ricardo Chariviaga and Jose Del R. Milan, BCI architecture, translating thought to action, decoding brain activity, context-aware BCI. And again, one of the papers that I've looked a lot at is Melanie Swan and her work on quantum computing and BCI. And I'm not sure if she's at Imperial College. Like, she was at Purdue, where Sentient World Simulation is based, and then she's in London, or she has a London affiliation, but I'm not sure if it's Imperial College or one of the other ones. So this one was actually quite interesting, and I'll put a link into when I get back. I'm gonna have to actually wrap up. I'm not gonna probably be able to read chapter 1, so I'll get through the table of contents, and then I'll come back and read the first chapter. But this one, Live Scent and Evil Stench. And, I did that walk around the University Science District, and including the Monell Chemical Senses Center. And I did a lot of this, talking about Yu Yuan with IEEE, the Extended Reality Standards Commission, and how he was talking about digitizing senses, including that they had done vision and hearing and working on touch. And then the next ones were the chemical ones, which were taste and smell. And so this is kind of crazy. They're talking about the use of olfaction in steering. Again, we're talking about quantum computation. So around sex, entertainment, the military security, public space in the environment. And so I actually took photos of all of that page and put it into a Google Doc. So if you want to read that, like that one really caught my eye because I know about it's stigmergy, right? We're talking about the ant computers and social computation. So looking at all the ways that they're using our senses to steer this computation and guided evolution. Chapter 5 is Reflective Computing, Naturally Artificial by Nicola Cervedzia. Motivation, what you need is what you get. Growing up with reflective care. And this is kind of wild. I was flipping through, I should actually read this one next. It's about a playground and like a smart playground that will optimize all the children like for the best levels of wellness and happiness. And we're seeing that, right? Because we're seeing weird things like smart playgrounds factoring in literacy and QR codes and transmedia narrative and LARPy type of stuff to get the kids like to really take away their own imagination and then to put them into a story that someone else has given that's structured in a certain way to use their creative consciousness to drive it into a certain arena. So this is about that. Theoretical consideration, mixing the senses. So synesthesia, I think, is a big part of this. Biocybernetic feedback loops, effective computing and reflective software, mood players, vehicle as co-driver, a reflective home nurse. And this gets into what Brandy and I were talking about in the Flow Life episode about social impact finance and smart housing and the elderly as an impact market. So like having your house be your nurse, your management. Then the next chapter is Healthcare in a Pervasive World, Simon Dobson and Aaron Quigley. The changing face of the elderly in society, bioinformatics, healthcare behaviors, avoiding social isolation. So they'll set you up with a tablet and a cat with a woman in the Philippines talking to your elderly parents to keep them busy. Chapter 7, Social Networking in Mobile Pervasive Environments. So I'll just sort of hold this up so you can see. All right. Gualtiero Colombo, Stuart Allen, Martin Chorley, and Roger Whitaker. Social microblogging services. Okay, so again, for a while I was on Twitter, but now I understand what that actually is. It's the ant computer stigmergy. So yeah, that's the microblogging and like all of the nonsense about the Twitter drops and Musk and the back and forth fighting and the intrigue. Like, no. That's all just part of the narrative. That's the planned part of the program. Social networking, a brief background, the structure of networks, because again, the exchanges, the circuitry, like that's part of the patterning and the morphogenesis that is working at a global scale. And also to figure out like who are you modularly, who is your digital identity, like who are you as an archetype in the transmedia narrative of the social computational system, right? So the social networks both do the initial identification and then herd you into these various groups with little overlap so that when at some point the social computation needs a certain type, they can tap on you and you'll have a very robustly developed, digitally engineered archetypal characteristic traits. And yeah, trust and cooperation, right? Because that goes back to the zero knowledge proofs. Like we can only trust Unicomp rules. And let's see. Oh gosh, there's a lot of chapters. Chapter 8, Smart Sustainable Futures, of course, because sustainability is the Sustainable Development Goals are the game board. And I was exchanging an email recently with someone in Canada and, they framed the Sustainable Development Goals as gaslighting. And I'm like, no, I don't think that's the right frame. Actually, the Sustainable Development Goals are the guardrails for the game. Everything is about optimization towards goal-setting behavior, like coordinated goal-setting behavior. And you don't get to choose your goal for the goal-setting behavior that's chosen for you within the alignments of well-being and commons optimization through the sustainability metrics. So again, this idea that of these 17 goals, the vast majority of them are about managing people in relation to the environment and climate and what have you. It's because actually it's a cybernetic structure to engineer people. And the social impact finance space is one of the layers, yes, to create new forms of debt finance and energy flows around that and to create, but the impact data is then being fed into ocean protocols for the machine learning systems, right, to develop the singularity. But increasingly, I'm thinking the singularity is not so much bringing consciousness to a machine, but is in integrating us in some sort of the unification layer into a global living dynamic computational system. Like we're the singularity. if they can get us tuned and harmonized. And a while back, I saw this IEEE paper about the harmonized digital citizen. Like, I feel like maybe we've got our understanding, we're accepting at face value what they say the singularity is, and it's actually something else. But the sustainable development goals are to get us there, to get us steered into this collective program at a global level. And then and it allows this idea of well-being management, which is the outside-in robot, to allow the spatial computing, the ubiquitous being, to take hold. Like, the computer knows you better than you know yourself. Like, disentangle from the natural energetics of the universe and the energetics of the people you love and you care about in your community, and simply let the computer engineer you through your digital identity system, right? Through your piles of soul-bound tokens. It knows what's best. And that is what is coming through, like, the wreckage of the mental health system, the physical health system, the breakdown of society at every level, is that we will then endow this computer with our trust. Okay, so it's not just gaslighting. It's a key part of the program. Once you understand Web3 token engineering, you'll understand and that it's not just money, and it's not just control to make you miserable, to make somebody rich, and because, I don't know, maybe they're lizard people or whatever. I mean, I don't believe that, but like that, these narratives that are out there, it's actually to steer Oliver Reiser's world sensorium. Okay, so there's, in the smart sustainable futures, there's sections about fashion of the future, shape memory textiles, light emitting fiber optic textiles. Now think about that in relationship to optogenetic and gene therapies. The potential of a Unicomp solution, local make take, so that's the circular economy coming in, disposal and upcycling. So that's all about textiles. The next chapter 9, Wires and Wearables, Janice Jeffries, is all about wearable computing and the cultural implications of wearable computing, which, again, for me, some of this, like the idea of remote robotics, that you're going to put your consciousness in a robot, but then at the same time, we've done all the identity politics for forever, right? Like, here's your identity. How intersectionality are you? What is your flag? Like, what is your poster that you've put up? What do you stand for? But then once they get it all tagged, they're actually asking you to just like jettison your material body and put yourself into a gamified avatar or into a robot. And what are they going to have? Like, I know Sandy Pentland, they were looking at little badges that would tell you something about the person. Like, are they going to, on these robots, have the badge that tells you that, like, the shop assistant that's piloting the robot is, you know, a 20-year-old black girl or a 70-year-old retired guy, or, like, you know, formerly like veteran or something? Like, what how is this identity politics going to fit into the robotics? Like, that's a big question for me. Like, here's your, you know, here are some things from, you know, little, oh gosh, what was that? It wasn't The Office. Oh, well, never mind. Slipped my mind. But okay, so implementing neighbors, using microchip implants, the black box beneath the skin. Great. So that's Katina Michael. So she's over at ASU. Michael Crowland, for your Niantic augmented reality game, your microchip implant. So some controversy about human chipping, Verichip, case study at the Baja Beach Club, chipping club patrons for e-payment solutions, again, because it's all linked to the money and the payments. The technological trajectory, waiting for the train in an age of Uber surveillance, the touted potential benefits, the real exposure fallout. So that's in the zero knowledge proof, right? Like, you have some sort of chip embedded thing that represents your doppelganger, your digital doppelganger, that will unlock or unlock privileges for you. Robot companions, technology for humans. State-of-the-art robot technologies, biochemo and neuro hybrid robotics. So that gets back to what Levin was saying the other day. Like, oh, we can't even tell what's human anymore. There's a whole continuum. You could have a human with just a BCI, and then you could have a Roomba with a few human brain cells on it. And then we could fill in every single slice in between, right? And so they've been working on, our understanding of what a robot is totally changing, like from MEMS and NEMS and nanomachines and robots. Like, you're supposed to think about robot a certain way. You're not supposed to think about it as a spatial computing computational system that's guiding you towards some sort of eugenic optimization. Chapter 12, when battlefield robots come home from war. Battlefield robots today, integration into civil society. I guess that would be like your Boston Dynamics robot dogs, huh? If Unicomp had today's battlefield robots. So that's, I'll just hold that up. If you guys want to pause and see that thing. And then, let's see, the final chapter 13, of course, they end with chapter 13, power and sustainability, Paul Mitchison, powering distributed sensors, wired, wireless, energy harvesting, powering intelligence. And this is interesting, just Leo, if you're listening, powering environmental controls for earthquakes and weather, because that's part of the parametric insurance discussion. And then there's a discussion in conclusion. So I actually have to head out, but I hope you have enjoyed this as much as I have, because I think, again, this idea that we're choosing to live in a world bathed by artificial frequencies and digital identities that are, if you haven't looked it up, look up NTT, Nippon Telegraph and Telephone's work on human digital twinning. It's out there. It's very clear. It's part of the Japan Moonshot Project that we're supposed to live as an avatar. But I would just keep saying that the invitation that they're offering is into military-derived cyberspace, military and eugenics and debt finance-derived cyberspace. It's a game that's not our game. And do we really want to live in this world? Because I think as much as they sort of talk about, and that's, Jeremy Pitt's framework was so strange in the talk that I saw him with Katina Michaels, is that on the one hand, he seems to understand, and yet he goes forward anyway and says it will probably be okay. And clearly the power and wealth disparities and the incentive for us to move forward into automated systems of pervasive computing, we haven't grappled with this. I mean, literally going to this mayoral forum and having people pretend like everything was normal, like everything was just the way it was back in 2000, that things weren't changing, that there weren't things to talk about besides just very basic things about school funding. That we weren't going to talk about the world that's being built for the children and what that means. Does it actually make sense to educate them for that world? So anyway, thanks for joining in, folks. I'll check back, and I think this is it seems like a very readable book. So I'm going to try to hit up a few of these chapters.